It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, news breakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Joan Shannon has served on the Burlington City Council for 20 years. Now the Democrat wants the city's top job after Mayor Moreau Weinberger decided against seeking re-election. Shannon, a realtor, will face fellow Democrat City Councilor Karen Paul and perhaps others at a party caucus in December. That's in advance of the March general election. Progressive Emma Mulvaney-Stanek is also running. I spoke with Shannon recently in her South End home alongside one of her rescue dogs who gnawed on a bone while we talked about some of the city's pressing problems and why Shannon wants to run. A lot of people would wonder why on earth anybody would want the job. How would you react to that?
There is only one reason for me, and that is to fix things. I can see a lot of things that need fixing, and it's going to be a tough road, honestly, but there's also some opportunity there, and I think that somebody needs to step up who's willing to take it head on.
A lot of problems. Let's talk about what I think a lot of people consider one of the major issues in Burlington, this whole opioid crisis. There are issues surrounding homelessness with it too, though I don't certainly want to conflate and have the two completely overlap. The city council and the city has really looked at this as a major public health and safety crisis. What do we do?
Well, I think that is definitely the question at hand, Mark. And part of the answer, the first step in solving a problem is recognizing you have a problem. And to my mind, Burlington has a really serious problem, and it's in a bit of a spiral. We don't have clear answers on how to stop this, how to regroup, and start making some progress here. But I think it's really an all hands on deck situation. We have to be open-minded. We have to not be too judgmental about whether the ideas come from the left or from the right. Everything's on the table. But I think that a piece of this is, not being unlimitedly tolerant of behaviors that are dangerous, inappropriate, and they're dangerous both for the community and for the people who are suffering with addiction themselves.
Where has the city or whoever you're talking about been too tolerant?
I think that we have been, we're seeing behavior on the streets. There's kind of been a philosophy or a policy really of not arresting people for possession, which I agree with that. But then it's, not arresting users. Well, that kind of depends on where they're using. And then not arresting user dealers. We're just looking for the kingpins. And I think that we need to be focused more on prevention, on addressing things before they get too bad, and not allowing these behaviors in our public living room, which is Church Street, City Hall Park, and, the alcoves and alleyways of our downtown.
So are you suggesting that we need to arrest more people, and there are people that feel like arresting people is not going to be a way out of this?
I don't think incarcerating people is a way out of this, but intervening in the behaviors has to be done. And whether that intervention comes in the form of, you can't do this here, you can go to treatment. You can't do this here, you can go to a mental health facility. You don't want to go to treatment or a mental health facility, then, incarceration is another tool in the tool chest. But all of the tools in the tool chest need to be used. And quite honestly, we don't have adequate tools right now either.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we have to face the fact that we don't have enough beds for treatment. The treatment services that we have are often inadequate to treat the level of illness that people have from addiction. When they get out of treatment, they're not properly supported. It's a long haul, and people need help. And honestly, this is not, our social safety net is not a property tax funded venture. That is a system that is supposed to be provided by the state. And I do not see a functioning system in the state. You can't look at Burlington and think that all this happened in Burlington. It didn't. While there's a narrative on the part of some that the people we see in town are not ours, they've come from other places. Well, sure, a few have. Most people here are Vermonters, whether they're not necessarily from Burlington, but they are Vermonters. And what are communities around the state doing to help the folks that are suffering, who are our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers? It can't just be Burlington collecting all of this and then and trying to address it from inside the walls of this municipality. We're willing to do our part, but we really need the state as a partner. And I am not one to, I think there's blame to spread around here. It's not one person not doing their share. It's a system that's broken, that needs fixing. We need help from the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and nonprofit partners.
Why do you think we've seen this huge increase in people using?
I think it's the nature of the drugs, and it is something, it is a national trend. Burlington isn't unique in that way. But I think that the level to which we're experiencing it proportionally is more than most places, and partly because we're small. If you're a big city like San Francisco or Boston, you can kind of tuck that in a corner and protect your downtown. In Burlington, first of all, I don't think that that's right in San Francisco or Boston or any place else that's done it. In Burlington, we're definitely too small to get away with that. It was almost attempted at Sears Lane. And I will say I don't wish that on any neighborhood in this city or in this state.
Tell me what you mean by that for people that don't know what Sears Lane means.
Sears Lane was an encampment that really grew. It started out, for years there was maybe a tent or two in the area, and it wasn't really problematic. I walked my daughter to school on this route every day, and there were a few people that kind of kept to themselves. But as this grew kind of out into the open and became emboldened, and there was growing evidence of drugs there, methamphetamine, and not really sure what else. It grew to be maybe 40 people on this city-owned vacant parking lot in the South End. And it was very dangerous. It was dangerous for both the people inside that encampment and the neighbors and businesses that surrounded that encampment. It was very volatile. It was lawless. Some people wanted to describe it as a utopia. I can tell you it was not. People who parked near that area had, one person had a crossbow arrow shot at them as they got off a commuter bus, went to their car. Somebody going to a business had firecrackers thrown at them. There was a crossbow arrow that went over into the neighborhood and fortunately got lodged in the neighbor's garage on the way to the neighbor's backyard. There were displays of guns. Firefighters couldn't go in there without police protection. This isn't something that is acceptable anywhere.
You talked earlier about the failure of the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. Can you amplify a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, let's not say failure. Let's be a little bit more optimistic that there is something there's a role for everybody to play in making this better. I think we really need the executive. The executive branch is controlling some opiate funds now, and there was a committee put together that defined how the money should be distributed. That needs to be distributed. There's also some control over the systems in the state, the corrections system, the mental health system, making these function better for the dollars that they have. I can't say that I have a direct solution on that, but somebody's got to take the bull by the horns here and look at this systemically, look at how we're spending our resources. For example, if we're Medicaid provides 2 weeks of care at Valley Vista, and I believe that is the only inpatient service the state of Vermont has that takes Medicaid. So you can't get into a bed for 2 weeks. What happens to people in that 2 weeks' time? How much further do they slide as they're waiting to get into treatment? They get 2 weeks of treatment. Well, is there actually evidence that 2 weeks of treatment is what people need? Because we're investing a lot of money to treat people for 2 weeks. But if there's little chance of success, would we be better treating maybe half the number of people, which would be a tragedy, honestly, but half the number of people with a greater chance for success and treat them for a month? They're coming out without supportive services. How do we get the supportive services that we have to be prioritized for the people that are doing everything they can to address their problems? Legislatively, I understand that, there's a few things that should at least be talked about. One is, we have associated with this opiate crisis, we have a tremendous amount of property crime. These are not victimless crimes. My neighbor who's, a kid trying to support his family, who's low-income family, 16 years old, he rides his bike to get to work. Now, that bike might only be valued at $100, but when it gets stolen, it's a tragedy for the family. More so than the $10,000 bike probably is, which is insured. These property crimes are very difficult to prosecute, and I've recently found out, now a little knowledge can be dangerous, so I don't know exactly where I'm going here, but I'm told that it is in Rule 3 of the state statutes that, if you were in New York, there's a much lower threshold for prosecuting property crimes. So how do we get the tools in the tool chest to prosecute when we need to prosecute and stop the rampant theft and the repeat offenders who get to just, continue with this? The judicial system got terribly backed up during COVID and doesn't seem capable of processing people in a reasonable amount of time. Well, people are entitled to that. And then what are we asking for in prosecution? When we prosecute people, what are the standards? What are the criteria that, our law enforcement is directed? You need a certain amount of evidence to prosecute a car theft. Is that established in state law or by practice of the state's attorney? Something in between? Is it effective? Is it working? Do we need to change the laws? So people need to be held accountable. And I don't think the only way to hold people accountable is by, packing our prisons. That's not going to work. I also think our prisons need to be, I heard a statistic recently, and this might not be exactly this right statistic, but, something like 40% of our prisoners have substance use problems. If it's anything like that, if I'm wrong and it's 50% or 60% or 30%, are we really effectively treating people in prisons? Couldn't we create something within our prison system? Because there you literally have a captive audience to administer the best care possible, give people the best chance possible for coming out. And when they come out, support them. When I went into Sears Lane and I talked to, I think, 5 men one day, I went in, talked to 5 men standing in a circle. 4 of the 5 men did not have IDs. So their baseline problem, when we're talking about getting at root causes, I didn't think this would be one of them. But if you don't have an ID, you can't get a job, you can't get housing. Well, you're now left completely on your own. They tell me that this was due to their experience in incarceration. I have heard from corrections, no, everybody gets an ID. Well, then when you're living on the streets, you lose the ID. And I'm told by, our social workers in the police department that it's very hard to get people's ID when they lose their ID. This is a very intractable problem to solve.
Let's go back to, on sort of a more macro scale here. I hear from people who don't live in Burlington. Some of them are afraid to come to Burlington to shop or go out to a restaurant. Then I hear other people who say, well, this problem's overblown. This is just the reality of a city. What do you say to people out of town who take either one of those positions?
That's a tough question. It's obvious that Burlington in 2023 is not the Burlington of 2018. I will say, I'm a woman. I go downtown on a regular basis. I have seen a lot of things. I haven't personally had a bad experience. It feels more volatile than it has in the past, but this is still a wonderful city. Church Street is still a wonderful place. We have this city on the most spectacular body of water in the country. Those assets that Burlington has, as well as the people here and the commitment to doing better, those things aren't going to change. That's still here. But we have to tap into more of that to not only restore what we had, but build it back better. I think there were some people that chose to break things without a plan. That's not to say that we did need to improve our systems. But when you break it and there's nothing to back it up, it makes it really hard to rebuild from that. But I think that's the goal. The goal is to build back better.
What do you mean that things were broken? What was broken?
Well, I would say that defunding the police without a plan was reckless, and we're still feeling that pain. Now, we were using police for things that, in fact, I do believe that there's a better system than the one that we had, one that differentiates more. You don't always need somebody with a gun going to the noise complaints, and so having a differentiation within the system is really good. And we do have more of that than we did. But we needed to add that to what we had. And that is what was done out in Eugene, Oregon, with their Cahoots program. That was added to their police department. It wasn't subtracting from it. We kind of took away the last stop. And some people will say, well, police don't prevent crime, they respond to it. But when you're a victim of crime, you want that response. And when you're about to be a victim of crime, they actually can prevent the crime. When you have somebody trying to break into your house and you call the police, you expect them to respond. And that does prevent crime.
And you, I'm sure, have heard, as I have, from people who say that they call the police and they either get an answering machine or they're told to fill out paperwork online. Is that acceptable?
That is not acceptable. And I've done it. And a lot of times it's not even possible to fill it out online. I think it's absolutely amazing. The ACLU came out and declared that, Burlington police was lying and the crime was down. Well, that's not true. You have to look, you might see that in the data. And I know we like to always be data-driven in our approaches. And while I agree with that, you also have to examine the quality of your data. So we had been, incidents were reported, about half the incidents were reported by the police themselves. So when you have half the number of police patrolling the city, you're going to have an appearance of reduced crime because they were reporting half the crime. When you layer on top of that a bunch of people who feel like, well, they're so understaffed, I don't want to bother them anymore. So that crime isn't being reported. Then you have a bunch of other people who think it's wrong to call the police. I'm afraid of what might happen if I call the police. So again, that's reducing reporting of crime. And then we've now gotten to the point where all the things that we used to call in for, like 5 years ago, if you saw somebody shooting up on the street, you would call right away. If you saw somebody down on the street, you would call right away. And people have just become, sadly, we're normalizing behaviors, and we can't do that. That starts to really eat away at the social fabric of our community.
We'll be back in just a moment. At Red Hen Baking Company, they believe pure, uncomplicated ingredients in the hands of skilled artisans are the building blocks for great food. They're dedicated to creating the best food from the best ingredients. You'll find an ever-changing lineup of delicious pastries, sandwiches, and soups at their beautiful cafe off Route 2 in Middlesex, just off I-89. Their breads are also available in many other locations. Led by owners Randy George and Eliza Kane, Red Hen Baking Company has been on the leading edge of the local food movement since 1999. Continuing our discussion with mayoral candidate Joan Shannon. You have talked a little bit about the defunding of the police. If you were elected mayor of the city, how would you be able to work with the progressives? There seems to be a very strong divide in this city politically at this point.
Well, I have continued to work with the progressives. I don't. I strongly disagree with that policy, which was not just the progressives, but I've worked with progressives on other issues. For example, ranked choice voting. It was because I agreed to support that. I was the only Democrat who agreed to support that, and that's why that came forward. Airbnbs was an issue I was passionate about. I don't think we should be converting housing units to lodging units. I worked with the progressives on that. For me, it's about the policies. It's not, I'm happy to work with anyone. And I think that a lot of progressives at this point at least say that they also want a strong police force. So the tide is turning there. Maybe people have changed their opinions, and if they have, I'll meet them where they are today. Happy to.
Let's say there are more police. What would you have those additional police do?
I think you need a police presence to deter crime. And that police presence, if it doesn't deter to crime, they need to intervene in crime. They don't necessarily need to arrest everybody they see doing something wrong. They need to ask them to stop. So that's the first step. And if somebody doesn't agree to stop, each thing kind of escalates from there, but there has to be a backstop. It doesn't have to be hardline enforcement.
Safe injection sites, is that something you would support?
I have supported safe injection sites, but I think we have to re-examine that in the age of fentanyl and xylazine. There's also more evidence now than there was at the time that, it was first proposed and agreed to in Burlington. And I think it should be reviewed again, but also needs to be reviewed in terms of fentanyl. My understanding is people need their fix every 2 to 3 hours. How does a safe injection site work for somebody that is using drugs with that level of frequency? Certainly, anywhere within the boundaries of Burlington, you're getting an emergency response within 3 minutes. So I don't want to be married to any single solution. I don't want to take any potential solution off the table. As I said, I think that we need to be open to all options, and we need to look at the evidence that we have, the best evidence that we have in each case. And in some cases, maybe be willing to try something new.
I hear people talking about the police chief, John Murad. What's he doing well? What's he not doing well?
What's he doing well? He has restored morale within the police department, and that was a heroic job. He has stood by us when we quite honestly didn't have any other options. He is, just profoundly loyal and dedicated to the city of Burlington. Everybody has their faults, as does he. I'm not going to publicly air what I think those are. I'll just acknowledge that, like anyone else, I think that, and myself included, I'm sure he could give some critique of me and suggest areas for improvement. But in whole, I think that we're just so lucky that John stuck with us, that he now has a police department that I think those working for that department are really proud of that department. They're operating as a good team, and he's been doing a good job on recruitment. But it's very hard. Recruitment is very hard because even though we've been quite successful with recruitment, we still have a lot of retention problems. People are eligible for retirement and taking it, and we have given a lot of bonuses to try to retain people, but we're not making as rapid progress as I would hope, and I do not fault Chief Murad for that.
You say that you feel you can work with progressives. Do you think that progressives feel they can work with you effectively?
I think they do. I think they have reached out to me when they see common ground. They're willing to reach out with me and work with me, and some more than others for sure. But probably true of the Democrats as well.
Do you feel as though the Democrats, there are now 6 on the city council, do you feel they are unified?
Again, it depends on the issue. I've split from the Democrats many times. The Democrats have as you know, Mark, I've had a long career on this. I don't know if you call it career, but a long tenure on the city council. And the Democrats have always been the big tent party. And so it's much harder to corral the cats in the big tent party. The progressives have always been more kind of toe the party line, very, very tight, cohesive a cohesive group. Democrats have always been more likely to split votes.
Let's talk a little bit about you. How would you describe to people that don't know you, what are your core values?
I believe that we need to take care of each other. And I believe in both compassion and accountability. I love this city. I came to Vermont one summer when I was in college. My sister went to UVM. And I just fell in love with Burlington, Lake Champlain, the people here. And that deep love is the reason that I serve. And that's why I think one thing that whether people like me or dislike me or agree with me or disagree with me, I think that most people will tell you, where Joan stands. And that's because, I don't get to that place without listening to a lot of people, but I feel it's my duty as a representative of the public to listen, to get all the information I can, to do my homework, then to make a decision. And I'm not going to please everyone. I'm not going to agree with everyone. But it's my job to then go back and say, this is why I decided, and this is what my decision is. This is why. To have some humility and recognize that I might be wrong. I'm doing the best I can. But I'm not one that is checking the political wins. I really try to make my decisions based on what's right for Burlington. And I have this really strong core belief in democracy, that I have been put here not to be checking the wind. I was put here to do the best that I can for the city of Burlington. And if I am not doing that well enough, then the public has the right to replace me with somebody else who will. And that's okay. I am okay with that. For me, it's not about the title or the position or the power. It's about doing my best for the city of Burlington. And respecting that the voters will have choices, and they will get the government that they want.
Go back.
And I feel like that sounds a little bit spiteful, but it really isn't at all. That is the way democracy works.
We talked about the opioid crisis, but I don't think we talked about that much about people that are living out on the street, and they're not necessarily all the same group. What more can the city do for those folks? What more can be done so that that doesn't feel threatening to people?
Well, again, I think that's you asked what the city can do, but I would say we have to stop asking that question and start asking what the state can do. When you look at all that the city has done, our city has provided the pods. We have a new place in the Champlain Inn. We're opening up the VFW. We're providing a lot of resources. What's everybody else doing? Where's the state stepping up? They will get funding, but other communities do need to step up. And with regards to people living on the street, this is an absolute tragedy, and the state needs to help people. You're right. It's not a singular group. There are people living on our street in recovery and trying to do their best to stay clean. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine living on our streets, battling addiction, trying to stay clean? And how do people do it? I have the utmost respect. We need to be providing supportive housing for these folks so that they can be successful. We have other people living on the street who are in the throes of addiction. And I think, like loving families, we have to say, we have boundaries, and you can't do that here. And the ancillary things, the theft and other behaviors, having sex in the office building stairwells, in the parking garages. No, none of that is okay. It isn't just poverty, it's these behaviors. And if you're not ready to accept treatment, there are different thoughts on how that should. Some people would say, well, you can't force people into treatment. I think there is evidence that actually, yeah, you can. And when we're looking at fentanyl, that's different than heroin. If you're looking for a fix every 2 to 3 hours, how can we have an expectation that you're going to have this space in your brain to get to, I want help, when the only thing going through your head is, I need my fix?
How do you get those people into treatment, given that preoccupation?
Well, other states will force you into treatment. You have a choice between being incarcerated or going into treatment when you're committing a multitude of crimes. Not everybody who is addicted is committing those crimes. And for those folks, maybe, you can wait until they're ready for treatment. But when they're not abiding by our social contract and our laws, I think that law enforcement should at least provide some options.
What does that mean? I don't know what
it means that you will be stopped from the activity that you're engaging in, whether it's theft or having sex in public places. That you'll be held accountable. You'll be given choices. You can go to treatment. You can go to incarceration. Many people have multiple problems. I think that's one of the other problems in Vermont is how we silo everything. There are a lot of people that have a physical ailment, a mental illness, and a substance problem. Well, there's a different location to treat each of those things. Where do you go when you have all three of those things? I mean, even in the hospital, it's siloed by floor. Like, which floor do you go on when you are mentally ill and you need surgery and you have a substance use problem? We have a lot of specialties and maybe a lack of integration.
Who's going to figure that out?
That's a good question. I don't think that I'm qualified to figure that out, but I would hope that our providers could offer assistance in figuring that out. Our hospital, as I said at the beginning of this, the first step is recognizing that there's a problem. I don't hear a lot of people talking about. I hear a lot of people talking about the problem of public safety and kind of what's going on in the street. I don't hear a lot of people talking about the problems within our systems.
What do you mean by that? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you know, the problem that the hospital has. I think that there are reasons that people are shy about talking about a lot of things publicly, but I think that we need better systems for treating people, and the lack of having those systems. Who's responsible for that? You know, I can't say that I really know, but I think that that's part of finding the solution, is kind of tracking it back and getting people to take responsibility and leadership for creating something new, because what we're doing isn't working. Mental health care lacks a system. We have this kind of spotty patchwork of treatment. It's very hard to get treatment just for, even you or me need a therapist, need to cope with an issue. Very hard to get a therapist, much less than you want a therapist you like, not just a therapist that's well matched to you. Wow, that's a very tall order. So getting outpatient care is extraordinarily difficult. When you can't get it, things escalate. Then you need inpatient care. But if you become violent, well, then a lot of people won't treat you because now you're violent. Oh, but you can't be incarcerated because you don't meet the thresholds of the law. So then you're left on the street and you're mentally ill and you're violent. These are failures of our system to address and provide for alternatives. You know, if you can't get treated here because you're violent, where is it that you go? There has to be a place, and I don't know that there is right now.
You mean like water, like we used to have down in Waterbury, or what are you talking about?
We can probably figure out something more modernized than Waterbury. I'm not an expert in this, but certainly we have a lot of smart people in Vermont that work within these systems that must be seeing that this is broken. So where is the political will to make some changes? And sometimes we say, oh, well, we talked about involuntary commitment and that went nowhere. From people working with the population of people on the streets who are often victimized by other people living on the streets, you know, I hear that that's something we really do need to talk about and revisit. So is there a willingness?
You've mentioned a couple of times that you feel as though the state isn't doing enough. Why do you think that's happening?
I don't know. I mean, I think that it is the state's obligation to provide our social safety net. And I don't see it there. And this is something, you know, I agree with the progressives on. The progressives talk a lot about getting at the root causes. And I am 100% on board with that. The root causes are things like what we just talked about, Mark. You know, the fact that you or I has a crisis in our life and we need mental health care, and it's very difficult in the best of circumstances, which you and I might have, to access it. Far more difficult for people with in lesser circumstances. I was talking about the root causes of these things that escalate because we're not treating people early enough for any of it, whether it's mental health care or substance use and even sometimes physical health care, being so inaccessible to people. We need to solve that at the root cause, on the root cause side of the pipeline. Maybe where I differ from the progressives is that I also think that we have a lot of people in the pipeline and they're being also spit out the other end, and we have to deal with the entire pipeline. So we have to deal with prevention, the root causes, people going, so that people don't go into that pipeline of severe substance abuse, which can spiral to death. But we also have to deal with people who are already in the throes of that. and we have to provide boundaries, which is what keeps our community safe. So, I do think it's, as they like to say, both and.
I don't understand when you say that you differ from the progressives on that. What are the progressives, in your view, saying that's different?
I think that what I hear from many is really a very heavy focus on the root causes. And as I say, I don't disagree with that. But I think I strongly believe we need to deal with those root causes. But I think we also have to deal with the reality that some people are way beyond the root causes, and you can't change that. They are where they are. And we have to deal with the problems of the root causes that weren't addressed already, which has led somebody to be on the street, seeking drugs, robbing people, being violent. That all has to be dealt with too. And that's where there's a role for law enforcement.
Should we have closed the hotel program?
That's a tough call. I mean, I don't think that the hotel program was giving people the supports that they need. Is it better than not? I also don't think that we just throw people out with no plan. I didn't agree with defunding the police without a plan. I also don't believe in just ending the hotel program without a plan. Where are people supposed to go?
You say you're an observer and not an expert. Do you think people are going to want a mayor who's an observer and not an expert?
Well, the sad thing about democracy, Mark, is that you elect a lot of people who are not experts because we can't be experts. So the best that we can do is gather the information that we need and gather the experts around us to make decisions. I think we have to pull together all of the resources that we have and try to find a path. And it's going to be a long path. We didn't get here in a day. And it's probably going to take us longer to rebuild than it took us to break it.
What gives you hope at this point?
This is a wonderful community with tremendous human resources. I can't tell you how many people come up to me and say, Joan, how can I help? And I think we need to figure out a way to harness those good intentions that are robust in our community and people willing to pitch in. We've always had that, and now we really need it. We also have really spectacular natural assets here. Being on the shores of Lake Champlain, it's spectacular, and nothing that has happened takes that away. We have philanthropists willing to invest in our community. We have so many people who care, and we have smart people. We have a university here. As we try to tap into the available data and evidence-based approaches, we have people that have the skills to identify that. And I think if called upon, they're willing to help.
That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, sponsored in part by Red Hen Baking Company. Thanks for listening.